the long suffering and justice that associated with it. We're looking for ways of expressing that transformation and encouraging action. So yeah, each of the artists today brings such deep re-envisioning of the worlds around them and within them. And they're transforming materials, movement, shapes, and textures, and our perspectives on the subjects that they touch. So we have three artists with us today. The first is Felicitas Fischer, who is a contemporary dance artist in the Bay Area. And Felicitas' approach involves really diverse dance practices from around the world and brings her own polyethnic cultural experience. And it's very powerful that Felicitas' work involves storytelling to reclaim and resist happenings in the world. And Felicitas brings a classical training in ballet as well as modern dance to her collaborations. She contributes to the online dance journal Stance on Dance and is the founder of Artists for Justice, an artistic collective to support a diversity in emerging artists and in social justice initiatives. And Felicitas brings us the beautiful work, Lungs of the Earth, which you'll hear more about. We also have Byron O. Young with us today. Byron is on the faculty at USF, and his work is quite multifaceted. Variety calls his work claustrophobic and expansive, intimate and existential, personal and political all at once. So besides today's exhibit, Byron has made an activist songbook as a collaborative process to counteract hate and to bring energy to those social justice movements. Also, Kidnapping Water, bottled operas for hiking singers and percussionists, and much more. And to this exhibit, Byron is bringing yet a new approach in as a musician and an artist, bringing us sketches for the piece Forest Requiem, as well as a participative a piece with participation that you can join in the gallery called Sculpture Scores. And we also have Alicia Escott, who brings this view, this beautiful view that nature is not separate from us, right? That we are really part and parcel. And Alicia's work is informed by how we're engaging in our immediate day-to-day realities as we're right in the middle of a climate emergency and mass extinction, and all this political unrest, and all of us experiencing a lot of loss and longing. And her work is multifaceted, painting, photography, video, drawing, writing, activism. So really delighted to have Alicia here as well, with two pieces in this show, The Archive to Come, A Letter to COVID-19 in a Seed, and another beautiful piece involving fire and acorns. So with that, welcome to all of you. And now we'll have each of the artists take some time to share with you their highlights of their work and give you a glimpse of it as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Felicitas.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you again, Gloria and Nell, for helping us organize this and be able to share and engage in dialogue all together around climate transformation, which Stephanie mentioned is urgent. There are emergencies happening, and this is something that I think is cannot be ignored much longer before it has a really serious impact. And it already is having a lot of serious impacts, and that's what Lungs of the Earth, the US, specifically in the Amazon region of Brazil. And this dance film was created with my co-collaborators, Connie McKenzie, the film director and editor, and Jaime Cerrado Santos, which was the sound designer for this piece. And together we created this hybrid exploration of movement and sound and film that really dives into this kind of social political inferno that's happening in the Amazon region of Brazil, and specifically the impact that it's having on the This piece really started out as a general concern and curiosity that I had just on what was going on. And personally, for myself and Jaime, we have connections to Brazil with our family and culture and identity. And so this was something we had both been following for some time and was weighing on our hearts. And to be able to create a piece that brings awareness about this issue that might not always get the media attention that it deserves or it should, because of just the devastation and the direness of the situation. That art, bring it into the, and to be able to give people an entry point into understanding what else is happening in other parts of the world, and to really talk about climate transformation, I believe takes also connecting the dots between all of these different events or natural disasters happening, or some of them are not so natural and they're man-made disasters. And so when we were creating this, it was very important to incorporate a lot of different perspectives. President of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, and one of the most prominent leaders that are protecting the Amazon region, Raoni Metotire, is the indigenous leader of the Kayapo tribe, and he has made several worldwide call outs, essentially, calling people in to stand by them in this fight for their land. So not only those two prominent voices, but you'll also hear the voices of news reporters and of farmers and of people in general, just the Brazilian people who are also the long-term turmoil that has been going on in the country. So with that, I will share this brief trailer of the piece, but you are all welcome to watch the full film in the Thatcher Gallery as well. And afterwards, I will talk a little bit more about our process.
According to the Brazilian Space Research Institute, over 10,000 blazes were recorded in the first 10 days of August.
A gente está tentando salvar.
Eu sou o nome de uma.
The source of the fire President Jair
Controle,
for the blazes.
Como por ser floresta única, como em grande parte dos Açores, não pega fogo. Então essa história de que a Amazônia arde fogo é uma
Yeah. So that is a little glimpse of what you will see in the film. The process of creating this was a bit complicated because we were commissioned by the Performing Arts and Social Justice Department honor of the year anniversary happening last April in 2020. And this was all in the times of the pandemic. So we had to be really creative in how we were going to make this happen. So it started off first and foremost with a lot of research. For my own personal art making practice, it's really deeply rooted in a lot of historical and political perspectives. And it's important for me to understand them so I can let those inform the way that I approach making choreography. As much as I could about this situation happening in Brazil from a variety of perspectives. And so that meant reading different texts, watching certain documentaries, listening to interviews, listening to Raoni talk about the situation, watching different videos that both regular people have captured on their phones and also what is put out there in the media, and seeing the differences and how the narratives are shaping around the situation and what different I guess standpoints there really are, because it's not a- it's this way. There's a lot of complicated layers to it, especially politically, and just the power that Jair Bolsonaro has in a lot of this, and the role he plays really in the development of the issue. So once we gathered a lot of those initial research questions and content, really, then it was a matter of conceptualizing those ideas into movement and sound. And so it started off mostly Jaime and I going back and forth about what kind of sounds and soundscapes do we want to create that from your living room or wherever you're sitting into another place in the world that may not be familiar to you, or you may not have known anything about before. And how do you tell the story, and while keeping as much of it authentic and real to the people who are actually experiencing it? So we went back and forth with the sound and creating a lot of different experiments, essentially, with seeing, what bits and pieces can we take from speeches from Bolsonaro, or what things can we take from Raoni's speech. In terms of the movement, part of what was really fun for me was to actually observe the body movements and the body language of these kind of key players in this situation. So, watching a lot of interviews of Bolsonaro, I picked up on a couple of gestures and um, ways of moving that he just shows up in a certain posture, or he shows up with a certain kind of energy. And how do I then channel those gestures and energies into the different forms of movement, different styles of movement to all coexist within this one piece? Because you'll see there are several phases that happen. And I also want to add that a key player in all of this is also the nature, right? I think the main hope or the impact that we wanted to have with this was to actually personify the trees and the environment that the dancers are in, and to be able to give the trees a chance to speak for themselves. What would they say about what they are experiencing? With what movements look like? What would it feel like? And all of this was really just captured through multiple multiple Zoom sessions with the dancers and having those rehearsals. And the film part, that was, I would say, probably um, the riskiest part of this creative process, because as much as we had conceptualized and choreographed and planned in the first 6 weeks of all of this, really in the end, and Connie did an amazing job of being able to really tell the story here, with different angles and different structures in the ways that we set up the dancers in the space. And so really all this is to say is I believe that any creative process or anything that is created is never created alone. Everything is made in co-creation. And I think that that also will help inform us in how we want to approach the topic of climate transformation, that there demands on our plate, but that we really have to look beyond ourselves and look beyond our borders too, and see that these events happening all around the world are not singled out, that they are interconnected, and really to be able to make an effort to transform our entire structure and our entire society to support the environment better, we're going to have to connect those dots, and we're going to have to really so I hope that that gives a good brief understanding to this piece. I'm also going to share some program notes in the chat, as well as a few actionable steps that I would encourage you all to take in order to support the efforts of the indigenous groups protecting the Amazon region in Brazil, and some organizations that are really, really great in just opening up their arms to receiving support from around the world. So yeah, that's all from me. And I believe I'm passing it off to Byron.
Thank you, Felicitas. And I just want to encourage everyone, start thinking of your questions, put them in the Q&A, please. But meanwhile, yeah, you'll notice a lot of resources being shared in the chat. Thank you so much. And yes, now let's next go to Byron. Oh, let's see, you are still muted.
Oh my gosh, such hello. I was giving thanks to Stephanie, and then also mentioning that I was extending points that Felicitas mentioned, everything in co-creation, to look, listen, and sense beyond, and to connect. So thank you for that. And I have appreciated Lungs of the Earth from the spring. I teach in the Performing Arts Department at USF. And it's so wonderful in the gallery, in the Thatcher Gallery as well. So I also extend thanks to Thatcher Gallery, especially now Victoria and Glory, for their curation. Especially as some of you may know, I'm a composer, so I write music. And yet my practice has been to figure out how everything is in co-creation, how to focus to expand. And so I'm going to start with about 2 minutes sharing images from the exhibition, and what I contributed are sketches. So my next large work is called Forest Requiem, where people listen to and sing with the trees. And so there are a number of sketches that range from photographs to folded paper to a musical score. And then finally, what I'll end with in this presentation today is part of the participation. So if you haven't been to the exhibition yet, or you're unable to go to the exhibition, we will be able to participate. So maybe you have a table nearby, and if you are walking around as you're listening, maybe grab a piece of paper because we'll be folding paper. So let's start this shared screen. Okay, so let's see if I do this. Let's see if this works. Okay, and then what I notice, so I'm still talking. What I notice when I share this as slides, it comes onto my whole screen. So if you're waving or you're in the chat, I won't be able to see you. So go ahead and call out if anything doesn't work for whatever reason. Okay, so here's the slideshow. Again, so you know, a lot of my practice as a musician is about listening, deep listening, and then figuring out what the sounds are and organizing those into a composition, right? And so I continue to call myself a composer, and there are different influences that mark my compositions. One is it actually changing? I hope it changes. We'll see. It doesn't seem to be changes, but the pauses. Oh, okay, there we go. Yes. So one is I am trained in European classical music, and so I know how to write notes on a page, circles and lines and so forth. The other thing is I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and my grade school was located in a second growth forest. And so me and the other children would be playing in this forest. And so I'm very used to being in a forest. The slideshow is going really fast. So initial images of forest are already gone, and it's already transitioned into these paper sculptures. So I've been folding paper. My father passed away last month. And so I've been gathering things that he has touched. These happen to be magazines that you're looking at from 2011. And so I folded them. And they remind me actually of seed cones, of pine cones, of different things that you would find in the forest. And what I'm trying to do is figure out a way where, as a composer, right, I write notes on a page, but I'm like, well, when I go into the forest, I usually sing the trees and seeing the landscape. Can I now actually make these two-dimensional things into 3 dimensions, right? Because paper, as soon as it was invented in China, people started folding it. And I used to fold paper with my grandmother. Oh, and this is the final slide. So this gives you an example of my music notation as well. And you can see it's an open notation, and then how it transfers out. Okay, so let me stop this, and then let me stop sharing and go back. And I don't know if this was. Oh no, was I mute that entire time? I think I'm back.
You're good. You're good, Byron.
Okay, but was I on mute during the slideshow?
No, we heard you. We heard.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. So now we go to the interactive part. So do you get these calendars? I don't know if anyone, if you can see, I'll zoom into that. So these in December and January, if you go to like 99 Ranch, I'm not sure if H Mart has them, but if you go to a Chinese grocery, they will give you a calendar for free. So collect calendars, and then so these would hang in the house, and then you can see it's perforated. So we ripped them off. So this is from August of this year, and then I found because it's paper and the other side is blank, so you can write on them. And so I found my dad's manuscript, right? He was of a generation where his handwriting was so beautiful. So, so it's something I treasure. And then in this case, what I don't actually treasure is he's doing accounting on it. So there are all these numbers. And I think, part of him being an immigrant here, he also supported a number of family members and friends to immigrate to this country. So he was always, thinking how he could support them. So there's got it. Okay. So there's that. So I invite you, if you can, reach over and find a piece of paper. And so this is what I have. And start folding, right? Usually I start folding by folding something in half. But you can fold something in a diagonal, you can fold something any way you want. And it's great if it's a piece of paper from a loved one. This is the preparation. And if it's not, you can kiss the paper so it becomes loved. And it's also great if it's something that has been written on or touched, right? And so the original use of the paper has already transformed. So in this case, a calendar, and then usually you would tear it away and maybe discard or recycle it. It's actually no. I'm going to use it and figure out accounting things. And then now we're taking that and we're folding it. So from preparation, we go into a folding meditation. So fold your paper, making distinct creases, right? And while my grandmother, when she was teaching me to fold, we would make objects, right? We would make boats or hats. I often find it fun to fold without thinking of what the object is, right? Because the object can shift then. So make distinct creases. And then remember how I was talking about being a composer and drawing lines and circles. So when I'm folding, I'm also thinking of curves. Is there a way I can curve the paper? Maybe it's rolling it. So all of a sudden, we have something curved with creased lines. You can tuck in edges, right? So triangles are really popular in these folds. I always like to think of magic folds, right? Where you kind of do kind of a seemingly impossible fold like that. And then you can repeat folds, right? Because there's something about repetition. So since I've done that, maybe I'll repeat it over on the opposite side. One of the things that my family and many Chinese families do is they fold paper after a loved one has passed away. And after 100 days, that paper is burned because the objects that the folded paper represents then go to the deceased. So contemplative actions. So I haven't quite finished folding all my paper yet, but we can imagine, if this were a cooking show, maybe I would grab another piece of paper that I'd folded and I would, it would magically appear, and I would place my paper sculpture at arm's length. So I invite you now to hold your paper arm's length from you and notice it. And then inhale the paper shape and exhale. And repeat the inhale and exhale. And in your exhales, you can actually introduce vocal sounds. And maybe the vocal sounds mimic the line of the paper. So inhale. Hey, So you're inhaling the shapes of folded paper all around, and you're exhaling the contours of the edges. And then you can release it. And maybe you want to move your body. So you're singing and you're moving your body along with these folded paper shapes. And then in the exhibition, there's a table, and you'll notice already so many people have folded paper. And if you'd like, you can offer your paper by leaving it to add to the installation. So much of my growing up in the Pacific Northwest and now is noticing, is focusing to expand. As an educator, education for me is so much about liberation and figuring out how we can liberate ourselves and each other for the social good. And so there's so much focus in there. And yet when I found I'd become too focused, I may become myopic. I may start to not notice things. So how can we as educators and learners, co-learners, focus to expand? And for me, it's walking, folding, making, contemplating, as well as a musician, a deep listening practice. And through this focus, for example, you may have noticed that photo of some pine cones and moss and so forth, focusing on that, bringing it together, expanding to the whole, and then again, being part of the forest. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Byron, and thank you for engaging us in what you do and inviting us to participate. Really appreciate that. Wonderful. And now we get to hear from Alicia about her work. So please take it away, Alicia.
Hi, that was incredibly beautiful. And I share mine became both a vessel and a beak. So that was really wonderful exercise for moving our body. And I'll also say I'm going to screen share. I just thank you so much for for having me here and including me in this really terrific exhibition and this talk that's so thoughtful. I love that we've already talked so much about co-creating. These are actually the works I'm sharing are works that are the works that I make independently in my studio. I have longstanding practices in collaboration with the public and with others. But even these works that I make independently are all I consider co-creations, as you can see here. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the two pieces that I have in the exhibition. And I'm going to give some background on some other works that would have inspired those. And so one of those works is a co-creation where I am collaborating with wildflower seeds in these sculptures and growing these wildflower seeds in these sort of embodied packages that get installed with installations in relation to drawings and other sculptures that I make with the host species of the that live with these plants. And so I've been doing that since about 2017, and I've been really excited to do that. And they're usually, again, get installed in galleries as part of installations. And so I had just started sort of the largest and most ambitious body of work of these what I call metabolic rifts in the water season of 2019 and 2020. And I think we all know what happened then. So all the shows that they were supposed to be installed in were all, if not canceled, they were postponed quite past the growing season of these. And so, they weren't going to be shown. And that actually ended up being a tremendously wonderful experience because they stayed in my backyard. And I hope you guys can see the video right now. But I ended up being visited by so many pollinators, both native bees and bumblebees, honeybees, and as well as butterflies and other pollinators and birds. And so I really realized I'm really interested in making work for non-human audiences. And that's kind of continued into some of my contemporary work. But I did want to kind of reclaim also the cultural capital of these works. And so I started making photographs with them and started making videos with them. And I have another longstanding practice where for about a decade, I've been writing love letters to extinct species in which I tell them about everything that's happened since they left me. About rock and roll or the internet or the stock market. And this is really a radical retelling of human history, especially since both the Industrial Revolution and colonialization. And so kind of a mashup of those, one of the pieces that you'll see in the show ended up being a video where I'm engaging with one of these wildflower sculptures in my backyard. And I'm going to play a little clip from that. Can you guys hear this?
No, we're not hearing it.
Oh, I think I forgot to do it, Felicia. I'm going to stop sharing. Screen share. Okay, I don't think it's going to let me. So I'll just go ahead and play that. So this work is both inspired by a letter to COVID-19 and also thinking about the virus as wanting life itself, and also thinking about the possibility of seeds. So in a separate body of work, but also related to the themes of seeds and regeneration, I had prior to this show, I had been in a show at Berkeley Art Center. If any of you guys have been at Berkeley Art Center, there's this giant live oak tree out in front of it. And so I wanted to respond specifically to that. And so in this work, the live oak tree that's outside enters the gallery space in this like entangled and disparate landscape that's a hybrid between the like natural and the synthetic or man-made. So it's entering the space. There's a detail. This piece is called Everything Alive Here is Dead. And on it are these scraps of plastic construction material from building sites actually throughout the city. And on them I've drawn acorns that are meshed with real acorn sculptures, vitamin tablets mimicking acorns, the connectivity of metal wires and chargers. So again, thinking of nourishment moving through. And in this work, I'm really exploring the construct of nature and the nature-human binary. And how, thinking about really how, even when we talk about saving nature, ultimately that's still really objectifying it as something that's over there, as something that's separate from ourselves, as though in saving it, we're not also saving ourselves. And so that nature artificial binary, I'm pulling it into question, but there also is a difference. One has co-evolved and the other, like this plastic, has been molecularly altered and produced in enormous scales in very short periods of time. So I would argue that what we mean when we talk about nature is actually a series of co-evolved, intertwined relationships that we could also call ecosystems. And there are many other words for that in different cultures. And so within ecologies that are evolved with fire, when we build structures that are not compatible with fire, we have disconnects. And one is natural because it's part of that relationship, that co-evolved relationship. and one is not just because it's not. So it's not that it's made from materials that are otherworldly. Everything is nature. It's because it's not in relationality. And so this work had a lot of subtle and small but important references to the built world and fire. Here, there's an iPhone charger that's been burnt out. And so the metals are extruding from it, they're melting out, and it's plugged into this acorn, so it's charging or being charged by the acorn. On the bottom left here, there's a branch, sort of a fallen branch in the installation, and it looks like it's growing mushrooms and soil, and out of it is coming an oak sapling. But on further inspection, you actually realize it's not a branch at all. It's actually a piece of PVC piping that's been burned out that I recovered from a Sonoma wildfire site. On the far right, there's more of that plastic construction material, and this one's singed. So it looks like a leaf. So again, this convolution between the natural and the artificial. Just to put it in perspective, that plastic construction material that I'm using here is actually used in very large pieces to cover buildings and to literally shrink them, wrap them with heat. And it causes a terrible amount of off-gassing. It's really intense. So my use of it is very small, very reduced, redacted, and like kind of disembodied. But so with these installations, I'm also thinking about regeneration here and about the regenerative power of fire and how a single acorn can become an oak and all the life that a single oak tree can produce, and how generative an oak community is. In a massed year, a single oak can generate 10,000 acorns. This is extremely nourishing for the ecologies that it's in relation to. And so this show is up in Berkeley, but it's during the pandemic, so I'm taking walks near my house in Buena Vista Park, which is also near your school. Highly recommend it. And there's quite a bit of oak ecology there, although younger live oaks that have been planted. And so I'm taking walks with them, and it's the pandemic, and I'm still thinking about the coastal live oaks and their acorns. And I start thinking about the possibility inherent in a seed. And I start making these daily drawings on this material from construction sites of acorns, and thinking about kind of likening that possibility that is inherent in a seed or in an acorn here to what's happening in the world and the social justice movements that are germinating and really flourishing in this time, and flourishing in this dark, quiet unknown that is the pandemic, and which I'm sort of likening here to fertile soil. I'm also thinking about the way that deep roots will sequester carbon, and how oaks underground will entwine and entangle their roots to hold each other up, and likening that to the proliferation of mutual aid during the pandemic and at this time. And so I'm drawing this acorn a day, and it's kind of this self-soothing meditation, and they're starting to proliferate. And so I'm really thinking about possibility and potential. And I want this to be an entangled installation, but I really want it to also be positive. But going back to that previous installation, I had within it, dangling from that entangled space, an iPod with a drawing of a grizzly bear paw and my hand inside of it. And we're reaching for acorns and apple earbuds. And I had thought about replacing this video with a video of fire, but I thought it would just be too triggering in that years after the fires in Paradise, the campfires and others. However, because this installation had been delayed, it ended up being up during our Orange Day, that horrific fire season of last year. And so I realized it's really not a time for holding back. For lack of time, I won't get into this, but I could speak at length about the appropriation of animal imagery for talking about management of land that they've been displaced from, so grizzlies. But so I'm thinking about the possibilities inherent in this, but as I go to install it, and I'm sure many of you have seen the installation, the fire videos show up and return to it. And so it becomes this, this question of how do we navigate the tension between possibility and desperation? Here's the video playing. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but it's the crackling of fire. And so thinking about both possibility and desperation are both catalysts, you know, as we talk about, as we talk about climate transformation. I mean, it is transforming, but it's like, what will be the impetus? You know, will it be the possibilities or will it be the fear? So just here some photos of those installations. I'm getting a little over time here, but I've been working with plastic for about 15 years. And this is actually the first time that I've ever manipulated the plastic. And so I'm thinking about, you know, the I call the piece disarticulated production, to talk about like making during the pandemic. And also, and also thinking about the ways that the workers who work with this, which off gases, especially when it's heated, and working in solidarity with them, so exposing my body to that. And thinking about the ways in the 15 years that I've been working with plastic, more than half the plastic ever produced in the history of the world has been produced, and that was accelerating during the pandemic. And while there was a slowdown in oil and the price of oil sunk at one point to below zero, those oil companies are ramping up distilleries for production of plastic, which used to be a byproduct of the oil industry, but is now front and center. And, you know, the clear connections between the oil industry and climate chaos, and how, as we're moving forward, the forest fires that are getting hotter and more frequent, we can no longer count on the regenerative power of fire. We can no longer count on the forest as being carbon sinks, but potentially sources of pollution and of carbon release. So here's just a couple more shots of that installation that you can go see. Thank you. Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my cursor.
Thank you so much, Alicia. That's so powerful, and really appreciate you bringing your different process and all of the tension in here. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so now I would like to invite all of the artists to have a little dialogue. I have a couple questions for you all, but please, everyone else in the audience, please put any questions in the Q&A, and we will take those in a few minutes. All right. Okay. So I have one question that I'd like to ask to each of you. You each were speaking about some of the transformative aspects of your work, like how you want us to transform what we see, or how you are showing and spotlighting how this disruption in the climate is transforming all around us. I'd love to hear from each of you a little bit more about, like, what can we see in your work, or at what level do you want this transformation to happen? Maybe we can can circle back around to the start with Felicitas.
Yeah. I think most trying to highlight or get the audience to see is really beyond our own borders. I think a lot of times there's a hyper focus on the issues that we face in this country, and there is an over mass of media that is covering everything happening here in the US and in the Western world mostly. Everywhere else does not get the same coverage, and when it does, it is given in a very specific tone or a narrative that speaks of it as if it was a far off. Really, the truth of it is that most of those other issues are really byproducts of our own problems here, and every action, every decision, everything that we do as individuals, but also as a society in one of the most privileged countries in the world, has an impact. It has a ripple effect on every single other system everywhere else. And a lot of those aren't necessarily for society or for the environment. And really what this is trying to do is ask people to see beyond themselves and see beyond what is happening here, not to diminish it and not to say that one is more important than the other, but simply to take a wider perspective on all of this. Because I think how do we really resolve these kind of major issues happening within the environment? They're not one-off instances, they are interconnected. And we have to be able to recognize that in order to first make those actionable steps happen then. And I think that this, for many people, you know, we often hear of things or conceptualize it in a few, you know, words or so. But I think what we were trying to do was at least capture as many different voices and as many different perspectives and ways to tell the story within this one film. And of course, it's only 8 minutes long, so it can't capture everything, but it's a jumping off point. And in our program notes, we tried to provide as many resources as we could to people to continue their exploration and understanding of this issue. And I think that is the indication of what is happening out there. So that's what I would say, at least for Lungs of the Earth.
All right, thank you. And yeah, that feeling, that connection, relationship, it goes across space, right? Across time, across species. Like, humans are the baby species. We're the ones most dependent on all this other life, and yet the dominant viewpoint doesn't recognize that, whereas in many other cultures there is recognition of that. So thank you so much. All right, Byron, any other words about transforming ourselves or transforming materials and sounds?
Sure. Yeah, I was so impressed with Felicitas's thinking about impact, and you know, every action that we do is connected globally. And I've been thinking a lot more about personal practices and how personal practices require intentionality. Because it's so easy to say, oh yeah, I recycled all this stuff and then not know where the recycling is going. And so for a long time, I've been interested in upcycling things. And so I'm super excited by Alicia's work too, and seeing the transformation of technology and pieces from nature, and also that practice of an acorn a day. And so, yeah, the kind of a daily practice of folding paper and figuring out how, I mean, initially paper was made from rags, but now it is mostly made from wood. And figuring out, is there a step before it goes into recycling or the trash that paper can have meaning and continue. So yeah, I guess the focus on an incredibly personal and intentional practice that's unique to everyone.
Beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And all, I have so many thoughts about this. You know, I've been thinking a lot recently about how I'm 42 years old. And so the carbon that was released in the year of my birth is just now having an effect on our atmosphere. You know, that's how long it takes to cycle through these systems. And similarly, in 1979, the year of my birth, we understood how climate change functioned as well as we do now. We've had a tremendous amount of science in the interim that has confirmed everything that we understood then, and has, has shown us actually we're working in the worst case scenario outcomes that were predicted in the 80s and the 90s, and all of these, the Kyoto Protocol, the Copenhagen Climate Talks, the Paris Climate, all of these these failed things. So we've had the science, we've worked on the policy, and it's not working. Like I said, we've got, since I've been making work about plastic, half the plastic ever produced has been produced. We knew about the Great Garbage Patch. We knew that recycling wasn't really working then, and so it's just like reaffirmed all these things. And so I've spent a lot of time in art school having to defend, like, why do you make art about these things? Like, if you want to save the world, whatever that means, like, why are you using art? But we have the science. Like, we actually need the culture shift. We actually need the shifts within ourselves and the shifts amongst ourselves to address this problem. That's where it's coming from. And so I think as artists, we have a unique opportunity to create a space to sit with the grief of what we're living through and the profundity, and not be solution-based. And I can't remember who it was, but I heard a great thinker talking recently about, because we're not going to engineer our way out of this. And so I heard this thinker talking about, like, we need to find spaces where emergence can arise, not figuring out solutions. And I think that art does that way of making connections through things. So I think, climate transformation, the work that we can do as artists is essential.
As an engineer and scientist, I completely agree with you. As an artist, completely agree with you, because the problem is human created, right? It's our mindsets and the way we relate to each other, including all of our relatives, right? The oaks and the mosses, and so that's why all of your work in this exhibition is so powerful, that you're engaging all of that, All right. So I'm looking here, and I really want to encourage some questions from those of you joining us, so we can hear your voices and engage with you on that. So we still have just a couple more minutes. Okay, I'm going to watch for those questions. But meanwhile, I'll pose another question and invite the panelists also to, if you want to ask a question of each other. The forms of your art in this exhibit are so varied, and I love how you don't stay within one particular form of art. You do whatever it, wherever the ideas take you. Like, how did these particular forms take shape, or how did you decide or land upon, doing a video, the sounds you brought in? Could you say anything else about, the form this took?
Well, for Lungs of the Earth, part of it was circumstantial, that during the pandemic, we only really had the option to work remotely. So a dance film made the most sense because there was no way to do a live performance, at least in the circumstances that we were creating this piece for. If I had another option, I would have preferred to do a site-specific dance that could have been a live performance where people would have been able to watch the dance by Maverick Lake, if any of you are familiar with that area. And so yeah, part of it was mostly because of the pandemic. But the other part was that I think there's a very important element of storytelling happening here that I think the film actually captures a lot better than if it were a live performance. Because if it's live performance, every audience member is getting a different experience, essentially, watching it, depending on where they're sitting, how close, how they're feeling at the moment of time. And that can also be true for when they're watching it virtually. But as a film, there's a lot more creative how are you really curating the story for the audience, and what kinds of things do you particularly want to highlight? And so most of that was in the hands of Connie, and she did a lot of conceptualizing around angles and specific framings that would help us bring the story to life, especially for those who are not quite familiar with the issue going on there. So I would say the form was really and there was time pressure as well. So it was, it was just of the moment. And we just had to make decisions as a team really on how we wanted to create this piece together. And we each input our own artistic style into it, and our own creative genius, really, of to like, how do we like to work in our own practice, but also collaboratively, how do we want to shape this piece together? So yeah.
Thank you. And I'm realizing our time together is coming to a close very soon. But Byron, Alicia, if you want to just leave us with a brief thought to close out.
Go ahead, Alicia.
I said you go because I don't think mine's super brief.
No, go ahead. You can have my slot too. I want to hear more.
Well, So for the work that's in the show, and first I just want to say, I think to talk about the diversity of pieces in the show, we really need to commend Glory and Nell for their really excellent curation during a time when they couldn't really do studio visits, nor could any of us visit the gallery, and also respond to almost all the works in the shows, I think, were made during pandemic and in response to pandemic, or most of them at least, which I think is like kind of remarkable. And I think the idea for the show was, before that. And so how they were already thinking about things that fit in so well. And I think I kind of mentioned a little bit about how with the video with the wildflowers, I wasn't planning on for that to be like a video work. Like I make those and they go into installations, but then because of the shutdown, they ended up being these like very strange video works. But for the disarticulated production piece, which is the larger installation, I think that was very in response to the pandemic, the shape that took, because, I have this great length of that material that I got when I was in residence at Recology. And I'm always like looking for big pieces of plastic, like people they're like, I got a mattress, you need a bag, not that there's any shortage of plastic, but those big things. And so the fact that I had this great length of it, but was feeling so discombobulated. So all I could do was just like cut off a few little pieces of it and take it home on my bike and work on it day to day, in the studio, which I think we were all.
Yeah, that's so, I'm sorry, I have to jump in, but thank you for, I want to thank all of you for going so deep in all of your pieces and sharing this with us. And we just want to close it out by taking it back to Thatcher Gallery and Glory to wrap up.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to all of the artists and to Stephanie for just your generosity of time and vision and honesty. And also, I feel like we were talking about some really devastating, difficult things, but also the fact that we're still all making things. And it's not about giving up, right? It's about continuing and finding relationships and continuing that conversation. So thank you so much for doing that with your work. And I also want to say thank you to all the students who are here listening and folding. I've got mine too. Thank you, Byron. So hopefully we will see you all tomorrow at 2 p.m. We'll be having a conversation about the Commons with USF Professor Vijaya Nagarajan and artist Katie Dorame and Barnali Ghosh. So we can continue this and get 3 more perspectives as well. So thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Talk to you later.